Welcome. We're live. I don't know how to change the settings on my live streaming. So I don't know. This is probably 1080p, maybe 720p. I don't think it's 4K. Pretty sure it's not 4K. I'm not sure my network could handle 4K. But I'm retesting the RTX 4090 on my new test bed in preparation for the RTX 5090, 5080, RX 9070 XT, and whatever may come out in the near-ish future. And I just wanted to talk about how I'm testing, why I test this way, and things of that nature while running the benchmarks. So there may be some pregnant pauses. It's okay. We'll deal with it, right? Settings right now, I'm just starting on Horizon Forbidden West. It does support, it's got reflex, which that's not really that important, but it has resolution scaling and upscaling. I'm leaving those off. Why? Because I want to start with a baseline that allows easy comparison of how powerful are the GPUs, not how powerful are the algorithms associated with those GPUs. And along with that, let's get this out of the way. DLSS is better than FSR 2 and 3. Is it better than FSR 4? Well, it's better in that it's already available and people are using it, and it's in hundreds of games. So yes. But will FSR 4 look as good as DLSS 3 and 4 and whatever else is coming? I would be very surprised if it does at first. It will take time to train the algorithm to get it to that level. NVIDIA has been at this upscaling business since 2018. So over 6 years, they've been toying with this. And the first DLSS 1 was kind of an aborted effort, right? It was spatial upscaling, and it had all sorts of requirements. And while it worked and that it ran, the benefits were often questionable. So eventually that was basically done away with, and we got DLSS 2. And that's been the fundamental building block of DLSS upscaling ever since late 2019, I think, was when it came out in Control. I think it was also in MechWarrior 5 Mercenaries, right? Something like that. And it was on a bit of a slow burn as well. It didn't immediately get a lot of pickup, but within probably 3 to 5 months of DLSS 2 becoming available, it was obvious that this was actually really beneficial. It wasn't just smoke and mirrors and questionable image quality and minor performance gains. Now, it's not the same as native rendering, and that's okay, because sometimes you want a compromise where, hey, what can I do to improve my performance? And so that's where upscaling comes into play. I don't think it's a bad option to be able to say, hey, I have a 4K screen, but a graphics card that can't really handle 4K. And so I want to try boosting performance, and I'm willing to compromise a bit on visual quality by upscaling. And we've had upscaling on consoles for a decade or more, really. They've been doing it since, PlayStation 3 era, probably. So I don't think you can just automatically say, oh, upscaling is bad. That's a very short-sighted approach. It's not always perfect. It rarely, if ever, has looked better than native rendering, but there are exceptions there as well, because you have to consider the anti-aliasing algorithm. I think DLSS, as an example, has a really good anti-aliasing algorithm, and that's what DLAA uses without the upscaling, which was supposed to be part of DLSS originally, and it took a little while for that to roll out. But NVIDIA figures some things out and made it better. Now we've got DLAA, and if you have a 4090 and a 1440p monitor, DLAA can be great. Anyway, besides that, so DLSS gets better, and they keep on tweaking things. So they went from spatial upscaling to temporal upscaling, and that improved the quality a lot. And so all these companies started going, yeah, actually, it may not look better, but there are times where it does, because there are games where the default temporal anti-aliasing algorithms look really lousy. In Unreal Engine 5, I mean, it's kind of hilarious to me. So UE5 has TSR, temporal super resolution. It's their own variant of upscaling, right? And my experience with TSR so far has been that TSR actually looks pretty crappy. It's got horrible ghosting. And there are games like Black Myth Wukong, and what was the other one that I was looking at? Oh, the name escapes me. But there are games that use TSR or use upscaling, and basically you can't turn it off fully. You can say, oh, just render at 100%, but you can't turn it off fully. And so you're stuck with that algorithm. And if you compare like DLSS, even with quality mode upscaling, so rendering at a lower resolution, upscaling to TSR at 100%, I would argue that TSR looks worse in many areas. There are aspects where it might look better on the screen, but the ghosting and some of the artifacts that you get from TSR is so bad that I just shake my head and I'm like, why did Epic, why did Tim Sweeney, whoever it was over there, why did they reinvent the wheel? FSR, FSR2, FSR3, those are all open source. They could have built off of those, but instead they rolled their own thing and kind of pushed the reset button in terms of getting rid of ghosting. So now all these games that use TSR, it's like, well, the TSR algorithm needs to improve just like DLSS originally needed to improve, just like FSR1 needed to improve. While I'm benchmarking Horizon Forbidden West, let me also point out something funny. You don't see it so much now, but if you were watching earlier, whatever the character's name is, it starts with an A. Aloy? Alay? I don't know. Once you get above a certain frame rate, things get screwy. And it does it a little bit right here, it looks like maybe. But at 200 plus frames per second, her pack and her loincloth, skirt, whatever, they were flickering and bouncing all over the place. Am I still live? I think so. All right. Oh, and I forgot to plug this in. Ha. Welcome back, whoever is watching. I would say I'd answer your questions in the chat, but I probably won't see them because I'm busy benchmarking. So, yeah, this is more demanding than Horizon Zero Dawn. I don't know, maybe the remaster is more demanding. I've heard from some people, they're like, actually Horizon Zero Dawn looked better than Horizon Forbidden West. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. They're different. Some of the new advanced graphics, I can see why people would say, hey, that's not actually an improvement. So, RTX 4090, almost done with Horizon Forbidden West. Next up will be Flight Simulator. Where was I talking about? Oh, so DLSS. DLSS has improved. And here's the real killer, is DLSS has been using a convolutional neural network, a CNN-trained network, for everything up until this point. Okay, that's fine. What's a CNN? It's just the old way of doing machine learning and AI. Old meaning, for its time, it was revolutionary. This is what ResNet used for image classification. I think that was over a decade ago now. Now they've switched to transformer networks, and this is what's powering things like Chat GPT and Stable Diffusion, they're able to have more parameters and run faster and better and more effectively than the CNNs were. And the net result is it should improve image quality, and DLSS is now going to have the option to force transformer mode, override it and use transformer mode, giving another upgrade in image fidelity, and it could potentially look better than the default native rendering. Verdict's out on that yet. I haven't tried it, or at least I haven't done it in a way that's systematic and I could say whether it's better or not, but that is coming. And you know who else is coming? My children are getting home from school, which means they're probably going to come down here and bother me. That's okay. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. This one uses Vulkan. That's a change of pace. Almost nothing uses Vulkan these days, or OpenGL, but id likes to use Vulkan, and the developers behind the Great Circle used id 7, and they changed it. They call it Motor, so they made plenty of changes, and it uses Vulkan, and it requires ray tracing hardware. Kind of wild. Now, if you have an RTX card that has more than 10 gigabytes of memory, you can enable full path tracing, full ray tracing. I'm not going to do that. Again, native TAA, not going to do frame generation upscaling, not by default anyway. I'll test the 5090 with frame generation, multi-frame generation at some point. I don't know if I'll have time to get it done before the reviews go live, but I'll certainly look at that. And see how it goes. But frame generation adds latency. This is a known thing. You render frames 1 and 2, or 1 and 3, you interpolate frame 2. Adds a bit of latency. So they say if you're going to do frame generation, you have to do reflex to reduce the latency. Now you can do reflex without frame generation and get even better latency. But that's beside the point. They want to market frame generation. Okay, that was DLSS 3. Fine. Now we have DLSS 4 coming with multi-frame generation. And this is where things get a little marketing friendly, let's call it. So instead of generating a single frame, they use faster neural networking algorithms and neural networking hardware to generate up to 3 frames. So you can set it to do either 1, 2, or 3 on a 50 series card, is my understanding. I haven't tried it yet where I could mess with it. I saw it at NVIDIA's demo at CES though, and so you could select 2 or 3 would be multi-frame generation. How many frames to generate. And he also had people calling it DLSS with 2x, 3x, and 4x performance multiplier, or whatever they said. The idea being, you know, are you generating 1 frame, then you're doubling your potential performance. Are you generating 2 frames, you're tripling it. 3 frames, you're quadrupling it. And the thing is there's more overhead when you're doing multi-frame generation. And so it's not like it just outright doubles what you were getting with regular frame gen. At least I don't think it will. But it will smooth things out. You'll still get the latency penalty, but it will run a little smoother. Great. Is it going to be better or worse than no frame generation? I think it will be like current frame generation, where it depends on the game, on the engine, on your hardware, on your settings. There will be cases, I'm sure, where lower end hardware, like an RTX 5060, whenever that comes out and is announced, maybe that won't be able to handle maxed out settings at 4K with multi-frame generation and provide a good experience. I really suspect it won't, because I suspect that card will still have 8 gigabytes of memory. It'll be GDDR7 instead of GDDR6, 6X, but it will still be 8 gigabytes, unless NVIDIA decides to use the 3 gigabyte GDDR7 chips. And those do exist. And we know they exist because they are in the laptop RTX 4090. So the RTX 5090. The RTX 5090 laptop GPU has 24 gigabytes of memory, but it's actually the same chip as the desktop 5080 and 5070 Ti. So it has a 256-bit memory interface, but it's been swapped from 2 gigabyte chips to 3 gigabyte chips. So instead of 16 gigabytes, it has 24 gigabytes. If NVIDIA uses 3 gigabyte chips on the 5060 and maybe even 5060 Ti, that would actually be really good, because otherwise they're 8 gigabytes, and games like Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, they don't even let you turn on path tracing if you don't have 10 gigabytes or more. And they can just crash to desktop, and maybe a patch will fix that. I have to restart the game because I changed from medium to ultra settings. So that's what I'm doing. So yeah, it's an interesting quandary that NVIDIA has created for itself. And the solution is to just put more memory on, but more memory costs more money. And so they're trying to strike a balance somehow. I feel like in 2025, for graphics cards that cost $300 or more, the 8 gigabyte chips really need, not chips, but solutions, graphics cards. Those really need to go away. I think that's kind of insulting to the users. When we did the 3060 with a 192-bit interface and 12 gigabytes of RAM, that was where I went, great, we're done with the 8 gigabyte cards, because we've had 8 gigabytes since the R9 290X 290 from AMD and NVIDIA's GTX 1070, 1080 were 8 gigabyte cards back in 2016. So we've had 8 gigabyte cards for 9 years, almost 10 years now. Yes, they were higher end cards, but I mean, a R9 290X or 290 at least was, I think, $400 at launch. And so now we've got cards that cost just as much that have the same amount of memory 10 years later. That's kind of insulting. And I get that technology has gotten more expensive and they've got more bandwidth and they've got all these other extra features. But AMD and Intel have put more memory on their cards. It's definitely possible, but you got to stop pinching pennies and trying to do frame generation shenanigans and just put more memory on. That's what I would like to see. Is that going to happen for the 5060, 5060 Ti? I suspect not. I think we're going to get 8 gigabyte cards when those are announced later this year. And I suspect they're going to struggle in a lot of games. And NVIDIA's solution is everyone needs to, not everyone, but game developers need to embrace neural rendering with neural texture compression and neural materials. And that sounds really cool, and the demos look really impressive. And if you can cut memory use by a third via this neural compression technology and get higher image quality, yeah, that's a great thing. But it's not great if it locks you into NVIDIA, and it's not great if it's only for future games that use the technology, because there's a lot of games out there that don't use it right now. And it will take time. Even if NVIDIA were the only GPU maker, it would take time for content developers, game developers to adopt NTC and neural rendering. So that's kind of where we're at. And it's interesting. But DLSS, it also makes it so that 4K is in reach of lesser tier hardware. 4K native is brutally punishing in a lot of games. Like even the 4090 can't really do 4K native at super high frame rates. Probably gets pretty close in this game. Like without frame generation, without upscaling, we're getting 160 frames per second at 1440p. 4K will probably cut that in half, but that's still very playable. And this is where I sit there and go, why aren't more games using Vulkan? I know DirectX 12 has Microsoft's name behind it, and Xbox maybe needs to use it, but PlayStation 5 doesn't use DirectX 12, so why aren't we getting more Vulkan games if it seems like it enables much higher performance? Maybe it's harder to develop for, maybe it's not. In the past, I've heard some people say it was easier to develop for, but Unreal Engine uses C++, I think, and it uses DirectX 12. So anything that uses Unreal Engine has to use DirectX 12. Well, that's kind of my thought for now. I'm going to finish testing this and then sign off. That will be like a 30-minute live stream, so 25-minute. That's probably enough. Sorry if there were cutouts. Sorry if you don't like the image quality. I'm doing this via my phone. I think it might be streaming at 30 frames per second, which kind of sucks. I was trying to figure out if there were a setting that I could change to say, hey, do a 60 FPS stream, because that's kind of required for gaming demos. But I'm doing it this way just because it allows me to talk and it's not using PC resources. And I don't need a webcam or any of that set up, and I don't need it shining in my face. I didn't want to impact the performance. This is the actual performance that I'm using for my upcoming 5090 reviews and 5080 review and whatever else. So this is the 4090 card, obviously, but like whatever these numbers are, that's what will be in the review when it goes live. And you can see it right now. Fun. No one's watching right now, but hopefully people watch this later. DLSS and upscaling and frame generation. I think with the new transformer models, upscaling could be reaching the point where it's like, yeah, you actually kind of have to be head in the sand to refuse to turn on DLSS transformers. That it will do a better job than traditional algorithms, even though it renders fewer pixels and then upscales them. And there will probably be they're not just probably, I'm pretty sure there's a DLAA transformers mode, so you can sacrifice a bit of performance and even higher quality if you want. But you can't do apples to apples comparisons because only DLAA and DLSS require an NVIDIA GPU. So what do you do on AMD? And if I'm running FSR 2 or 3 or 4, or I'm using Intel and running XeSS 1.3 or 2 or whatever it is, it's not apples to apples. They can look different. Whereas if I'm rendering using native TAA, or if I have no other choice with Unreal Engine 5 using TSR, well, that's okay. I can do that. And they're running apples to apples, and then I can look at upscaling as a secondary consideration and say, hey, who looks better? Who runs better? Right now, FSR 2 and 3 often give you a bigger performance boost than DLSS, but they have clear rendering artifacts because of their upscaling fast and dirty algorithms. And NVIDIA is keen to point that out, and NVIDIA is not wrong. DLSS looks better. 118 frames per second on the 4090 at 4K ultra settings. Now, there are higher settings in this. You can go to very ultra and supreme, which I think is just kind of funny. But I tested that medium and ultra without full path tracing. I only did medium quality at 1080p because that's just the way I do things. So you go from 1080p medium to 1080p ultra. You're only changing the quality setting. And then from there, you just change the resolution, because if you benchmarked at like 1440p medium, guess what? Performance is going to be a lot like 1080p ultra. And it takes time to run benchmarks, as you can see from this video. And I don't want to sit there and waste time to show equivalent performance. We already know most games, 1440p medium runs about like 1080p ultra. Next up, Flight Simulator. I've got both flight simulators, the old and the new, 2020 and 2024. 24 is so new that I didn't want to totally abandon 2020, so I'm doing both. Anyway, that's going to do it for now. Thanks for watching. Bye.